So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Supply Chain Talk. My name is Duncan Brock. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to host yet another insightful discussion around the challenges associated with us all in supply chain. I'm looking forward to this week's discussions. We choose a different topic every week. Last week we were talking about supply chain talent shortages and what we could do, what we'd like to do about that as we go forward. And this week, very topically, we're going to focus a lot more about sustainability and the drive towards net zero that we know we should all be taking forward in our supply chains and the approach we want to take towards that. And with COP26 going on, with lots of statements coming through, delighted to be able to explore that in a bit more detail with three excellent guests who I'm going to bring in at various points in time through the discussion. So really looking forward to that. I think as I've already seen a couple of people, Trudy and John, have posted in chat. Those of you who are watching this live have a great opportunity to participate, to be a part of the conversation with us. So please do use chat to add any comments, any thoughts you've got as you'd like to go through. So welcome Ashley from Drizzly, Essex. Is that the official title for Essex? So welcome to you. So anyone else who wants to join, please do so on chat. Also, as we go through, as we get the guests to sort of share their experience and their thoughts, please ask any questions. Use the Q&A to pose any specific questions you've got to any of us as we go through. We do have a delightful Supply Chain Talk mug that you can win if you have the best question or the best comment as you go through. So please do take the opportunity to add any questions, and I will be looking for someone to win the mug as we finish. So that's what we're going to do. We talk about net zero emissions from the supply chains and how we get there. And we're going to do this in two halves. We're going to firstly focus on a news article and a topical story around that. And then secondly, we're then going to do a lot more focus on specific points of issues in the supply chain, which we'll get the guests to talk through. So that's where we're at. That's what we're going to do. So hello to you, Thomas from Ghana, and also to Mark. So welcome to both of you as well. Good to have you with us. Let's bring up the news item, and then I'll bring in our first guest. So the news item we want to talk about this afternoon is one that was in the FT a couple of days ago. I was talking about the need to focus on your supply chain and focus on sustainability through your supply chain, but actually was also talking about the fact that you can't do it alone. That actually, I think as more of us look at the challenges of looking at the drive towards net zero, I think we're all coming to the conclusion that while we can do some stuff ourselves, we need to work with others. And this article, and I'm going to bring in the guests to talk about it, was talking about the fact that actually we need to work probably with our competitors, that we need to focus with competitors on the right areas in the supply chain, because without working with competitors, we're not going to be able to really get the message down the supply chain or look at changes that need to take place in our supply chain. So I think it's a really interesting take on it, and really interesting about the need that technology providers, other providers need to really focus on collaboration. From my own experience, we work with an aerospace and defence group at SIPS. We also work with a construction group at SIPS. And it's been really interesting to look at competitors in those sectors getting together to focus on driving forward on sustainability, driving forward on the drive towards net zero, and doing it collectively rather than doing it individually. I'm sure that's a thing that we'll come back to as we go forward. So let's bring in my first guest. The first guest I'd like to bring in is Daniela Soto from PepsiCo. So welcome to you. Delighted you can join us. I don't think you're joining us from Drizzly, England, or Drizzly, Essex, as Ashley puts up there. I think you're joining us from Mexico. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. I'm in Guadalajara, Mexico right now.
Okay, so welcome to you, and great to have you with us in here. I mean, Supply Chain Elf has just posted your LinkedIn profile, but maybe a very quick intro to you, Daniela, just with your background before we drop in and talk about the news article.
Sure. Well, I'm from Mexico, Mexico City, born and raised. I have almost 24 years of experience working most of my career in the supply chain. So I'm an industrial engineer, but I specialize in logistics. So I work in every single area of the logistics and supply chain. And a few years ago, I actually had the opportunity to run also manufacturing, which was very insightful, and also, a ton of new knowledge around sustainability and stuff. And well, currently I'm working for PepsiCo for the uh, business services for supply chain in
Okay,
Mexico.
great. And so welcome and great to have you with us, or this morning, your time. So thank you for joining us. So, and this article that was in the FT was talking about the need to collaborate down the supply chain. I mean, is that something that I know there is collaboration that goes on in your sector? Is that something that you're seeing that you're looking to do or that you are doing? And what's your thoughts about how to, I know, in your case, collaborate with Coca-Cola or collaborate with other sort of major players in your sector?
Well, actually, that's something we had to do. I mean, in my former company, I worked for the Hershey company for chocolate and candy, and one of the the category of items that they're currently selling is flavored beverages, milk beverages that come in Tetra Pak. And I know that there it's a high culture for recycling in Europe and other countries in Asia and the US, but in Latin America it's very challenging because there is not first of all, there are not a lot of policies around recycling, and then people is not used to it. But we know that we are responsible for that, so we collaborate with the supplier, with Tetra Pak, and a lot of the companies that work with them, most of them obviously are competitors, to run campaigns to have places where you could drop your Tetra Pak remains or the packaging that after you drink your beverage, so you could collect and recycle that. So that there are campaigns that are happening throughout the year to do that. But there is also another thing that we did as let's say at an industry, the food industry, which is to start adding notes to the packages, beverages, explaining the consumer how to recycle. One thing, for example, is the straw, and there have been a ton of regulations around straws and how to recycle them. And for example, I mean, if you're using one of these containers, the ideal way to recycle is to keep the straw inside the package, you compress this package, and then put it in a recycle bin. That's the right way to do it, not to separate it or anything. So there is a combination about how do you combine your own marketing with this type of messages to educate the consumer on how to recycle things, and then you also have to do partnerships with your suppliers and competitors to do that.
So how did you find? I mean, what you're saying there is, for Tetra Pak and others, to get them to really work with you, you need to come together collectively as all their customers. How do you find it actually working with a competitor though in that environment? Because
I think
it's not easy, is it? You start from this sort of sense of competitive advantage. We're all sort of fighting for the same market, and suddenly you're now having to operate in a different way in looking at a common goal or a common sort of challenge that you're facing.
I think in this particular example, it was fairly easy because we had a mediator, which was the supplier. So he was working with us, particularly because it's always also in his best interest, right? Because if we start prohibiting his containers, then he will run out of business. So he also has to work and invest a lot of time and money to find a way to recycle and also to educate consumer. So I think in this particular example, it was easier because we actually didn't have to sit down on the same table with the competitor. We did everything through the supplier, and that was fairly easy. With other type of things, I think it would be a little bit more complicated. I mean, in terms, for example, pet bottles or something like right now, every company has their own campaign, and we are basically doing the same thing, but on our own, let's say separately.
So I suppose the question there would be, if you were to work together, would you get there quicker? If you had a sort of a common goal, a common drive on something like bottles.
I'm sure that there may be a few things where we could work together, particularly, and again, I'm going to refer to Latam, which is a market that I know better. Unfortunately, our governments normally react towards sustainability when they are have pressure from other global entities or the UN or things like that. But I think in some cases we have to push our governments to help us with certain regulations so we can ensure that we are actually doing recycling, or that we have certain, a certain benefits to use electric vehicles or things like that. Because I mean, even though we would love to have 100% of electric vehicles everywhere, the reality is that they are super expensive, almost twice the price of a regular vehicle. And again, I think that's another thing we could do together, to talk or work with the governments to help us make that happen faster.
I think it's going to be interesting to see. COP26 is underway at the moment. So we're seeing a lot of statements coming out from governments about the things that they could do, or that they are doing, or that their ambitions and their goals for 2030, 2040 onwards. So I think you're right. I mean, that sort of specific focus on the areas that are important for the government in your countries is also going to be part of this as well. And that maybe we're back to this whole point of collaborating in the supply chain with a government initiative behind it. It again becomes a bit easier to overcome some of those competitive challenges that I think everyone's facing. But no, it's a really interesting perspective there, Daniela. Let me bring in the other two guests, and let's sort of broaden this out into get their perspectives as well. So if I could ask sort of Guy Weisel to join us, and also Melanie Salter. It'd be good for the two of you to join us as well. So welcome to both of you. And let's join the thing, and let's just get your microphones turned on as well so we can hear you. I hate to have that sort of line of you're on mute, because I think it's probably drives us all mad by now, doesn't it? So Guy, welcome to you, and to Melanie. So Guy, let's just start with you. Give us all a quick intro to you and your role at Radley.
So I'm the Global Supply Chain Director. So I oversee the end-to-end movement of goods across the world. I joined about 6-7 months ago. This is a business that started a sustainability journey a couple of years ago, and are now making active commitments towards reuse, recycling, energy consumption, in order to become eventually a net zero business. We still have a long way to go, like many others. We're working hard on our kind of scope 1, scope 2 levels. Scope 3, the supply chain lump, which for all of us, I'm sure, is the biggest element, is the next one in our crosshairs.
Thanks for that. I think we got your picture seems to be frozen as well, so you're looking very earnest. But it's good to have you with us. And you say that focus on scope 3 is probably the one that is challenging most organisations in terms of how to go about doing that. So welcome to you, and I think we'll come back to that. Melanie, welcome to you. Thanks for joining us. Quick intro to yourself, Melanie.
Hi, thanks for having me today. So I am an independent consultant. I've worked in supply chain for over 20 years. My background is maths and supply chain network design, and I've designed supply chains in Europe, Africa, and North America. And then the pandemic hit. And one evening I have a small child coming in, of course. Go out. Please go and ask your father.
But I already asked him, so can we? He said yes.
Okay, off you go.
Where's the phone?
Really sorry about that.
Where's the phone?
Downstairs in the kitchen. Oh, well, we've all been there, right?
Absolutely.
So actually, it segues quite nicely. One night in April 2020, I was feeling extremely depressed about the state of the world and the impact, the legacy we're leaving for my children, who come in and interrupt me all the time. And it put me on a very different course because I've taken my strategic approach to network design and expanded it to say, how can we design sustainable, resilient supply chains that can stop climate change and be ready for the next disruption? And yeah, it's been a very interesting time, and as I'm here, very topical.
That's great. Thanks for joining us, Bella. As you say, it's the joys of working from home. My challenge is normally my dog rather than my children. Got this view of squirrels out the front door or out the back door. As soon as she sees a squirrel, she starts barking, no matter what I'm doing. So it's we all have those joys. And I think we all got a lot more comfortable with that than maybe we were in the past as well. So great to have you with us. So let's come back to what I was talking to Danielle about was this sort of story, the need to collaborate in supply chains, focusing on scope 3 emissions, focusing on our common suppliers and supplier base. And I think, Guy, let's come to you first. I mean, you're saying that Radley are on a journey on this stuff. They're still looking at it. Is it something that you would also see that you would need to be doing or want to do, or something that you think is really important to be able to do that with your own competitors in your own supply chains?
I think in our particular field, it would certainly be more of a challenge to be looking at collaboration, because if I'm collaborating with another brand, there is difficulty. There is always risk of copycats, for example, the risk of our proprietary designs being shared too widely before they hit the market. Whereas in a more industrial setting, absolutely there are opportunities for collaboration and driving the right attitudes across a wider supplier base. The idea itself of collaboration is nothing new. 20 years ago, I was involved in a discussion between a pet food supplier and a toilet roll supplier as to the pet food was too heavy to double stack a full trailer. So put a layer of dog food and then fill it up with toilet paper, because that was going to the same place. So the concept of collaboration has been around for a long time. And there are certainly elements like that that can drive benefit in terms of sustainability. But again, and one has to be serious about this, there's a cost benefit as well.
You seem to have just lost Guy. Oh, we're having fun this afternoon, aren't we? He seems to have frozen on us in a very animated pose. So we'll come back to you in a minute. He's gone totally. So Melanie, I mean, you're talking there about your role looking at strategic modelling of supply chains and the focus on sustainability. I mean, are you going as far as then looking at suppliers and their other customers and how that would work in practice? Do you think that's something that organisations need to be doing a lot more of?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, collaboration is all. We were discussing this yesterday, and a third of trucks in Europe are travelling around empty, and just the opportunity sitting there. And from a financial point of view, if you can fill those trucks up, everybody saves money. But they're still working out how to do that. And there's the organisation Alice looking into how to do it and putting software in place and helping the conversations. But there's still not that sort of that momentum to get it just over that first, like Guy was saying, it's like we don't want to lose our competitive advantage. How do we get everyone to play nicely, because it's in everybody's best interest ultimately. I was reading about the cotton supply chain and just how natural capital and just how if you have a bad cotton yield, it just knocks everything down the entire supply chain. And so it's in everybody's best interest to work together to preserve the natural capital. And you've got around the world all these different organizations like Organic Cotton that they're all working to preserve, to help the farmers to be more sustainable, because it's in everybody's best interests. If they have a bad yield, the price of cotton goes up, its availability decreases. So I think where there's a common goal, it is much easier to collaborate like that.
Right. I think that maybe comes back to the point of, is this something you drive? I mean, Danielle, you talked about the government being able to sort of step in and do this. Or, I mean, Melanie, you're talking there about a third party almost. There's someone else acting as that facilitator of collaboration and focusing on things. And is that one of those things that would, if more organisations stepped into that, we'd get more progress on it? It's a question.
I think you're right. Organisations like SIP, for example, can help those conversations to drive the global benefit forward. I think that is an important function that a lot of the trade bodies and trade supporters should be driving.
Right.
Yeah, those industrial bodies are those industrial bodies are, a neutral party to act as the linchpin around which everyone can send in their data.
If I may add, I think a way to do that is through the suppliers, particularly. I mean, if we do not own our own fleet, for example, like the trucks, and if we work through the suppliers, we can do more consolidation. We can work with them so they can make routes, for example, to pick some materials, drop the materials, pick finished goods, deliver finished goods. I think that's something. I mean, if we do not want to sit down on a table with our competitors, I think we can do that through our suppliers.
Right. So that's the suppliers being proactive and taking some ownership, but actually bringing you to the party. Which I suppose, Guy, back to your example of trucks being half full with something and then filling up with the others, then you could go look for a partner to work with, or the supplier could go, you know what, it's crazy driving around with empty trucks. Let's try and find other customers who can actually use that truck space in the way that you're describing.
Absolutely. And I mean, backhaul has been a subject that various technology companies have looked into for as long as I've been in the industry, which is long enough, sort of steam carriages and that sort of thing. But nobody has really built something that works effectively that I've seen. So if anybody's online and tells me there is an opportunity, then absolutely be interested. But the technology solutions have not fully provided those answers yet.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've got some good questions coming in, particularly from Ashley Cook. He's obviously decided to really sort of challenge some of the thinking here on this whole area. And I'm going to start with one, and I think it probably links into this whole focus of net zero. So I think what Ashley's question is around, do we need to classify net zero within our supply chain ecosystems as a different risk category to cover all aspects of ESG and from a quadruple bottom line? So that's a really, I think we're all probably guilty of it. I'm probably net zero. So what does it mean? And actually, I think what Ashley's going there is saying, do we need to actually have it very specifically classified? And maybe a second question is then probably, how do you then make sure you end up with a consistent definition, which I think was a question that comes from John Richards. So the two probably come hand in hand. So what's your views on both of those? Do we need to have it classified separately, and do we need a common definition?
I'll pick up the piece of common definition. It's certainly probably one of the biggest challenges to how you define what your emissions are, who they sit with, particularly around the scope 3 aspects. But at the same time, there are companies appearing on the market that are starting to, or technology companies that are starting to build relatively open networks that allow you to engage with your supplier base, with your transport base, with your supply chain base, to build one set of standard documentation, one set of standard outputs, and then enabling, yes, a factory to sign on and say, yes, today I used 10,000 gallons of water, and we had the electric on for 14 hours, whatever it may be. Those things can now start to be recorded so that they're actually visible at a higher level. And then that will also, as those kind of independent data networks, people like IS Network, Networld and people like that, as they start to come of age and get more and more people joining, then we can get to some level of commonality in what we're talking about.
So you think it's coming, but it'll take a bit of time. And Melanie, Daniela, what's your view on that?
Could you repeat your question because you broke up?
Okay, so what is this common definition? Or do we need a common definition of net zero? Do we need to get to a point where everyone's measuring in the same way, tracking in the same way as we go forward?
Well, that's one thing, but I guess everybody knows what net zero is. I mean, we are not supposed to pollute, right? So that's it's like with incidents or accidents. You do not place a target for having one accident a year, right? So your goal has always have to be zero. So here we know that it's probably too visionary or too idealistic to go to zero, but I think that's something that we all have to have in mind. I mean, that means do not create any waste, whatever that is, whether that's gas emission or it is, carton, glass, or even, pollute water. So that's another thing that we as a supply chain, we know that we use a ton of water in most of our processes. So some of that water, it goes to our finished good, and that's fine. But there's another portion of the water that we do not use or we pollute in a way. So we are responsible for cleaning that water, but most importantly, to reduce the amount of water that we're using in certain processes. And I think that's another challenge. For example, if you have to clean your equipment, you definitely have to clean your equipment. But I mean, how do you clean your equipment in a way that you use the less amount of water possible? So that's the challenge. And there are new things coming out right now, new cleaners or new techniques that we could use to potentially at some point get to zero, right? It's like, for example, astronauts, they don't have it in the space station, they don't have water, they have to recycle things to get it. So how they got there, I mean, they got there by need because they cannot be, loading bunch of tons of water just to take with them. So it's similar here. I think we need to have a mentality of scarcity. We need to think that eventually we're going to run out of water. So how are we going to react towards that? How can we change our processes, assuming that we don't have the level of availability that we have right now?
That's a good point. Really good point. So, I mean, what you're saying is we've got to get on with it, whether the measure's right or not. And I think where Guy was coming from, these measures will evolve, but actually, the problems you're trying to solve, and therefore getting on with that will actually start to drive some of these towards that net zero. And I think, Melanie, when we were chatting yesterday, you sort of said something like, just get on with it. I think was your phrase. It's always like that sort of sense of, yes, we know what the end goal is, and we can have targets which are 2030, 2040, 2050, but you've got to get on and start to do some of these things.
Yeah, it's semantics. I mean, it's good to think about it because it's moving you in the right direction. And I totally understand the question, but it's like, okay, there's not one definition, and that happened. Nobody can even agree on what a supply chain is, quite frankly. So it kind of, as Daniela was saying, it's just like the most important thing is start looking at how you can reduce your impact on the planet. So, how you can be more sustainable, so economically, environmentally, and socially.
Yeah.
But picking up what Daniela was saying and talking about reducing the water and cleaning, I was reading that sustainability is the new lean because it's about eliminating waste. So you're saying, how can we get it down to the smallest amount of water and still clean our equipment? And eliminate that waste, it becomes more sustainable and happily also reduces cost in that way. So I like this going hand in hand. Okay, we've got the lean concepts. Didn't work so well during the pandemic because we were over lean, but we know how to do that. If we can apply it in more sustainable ways, we can do that. We can run with that. Supply chain people can do anything, as they've proven in the last 20 months.
Yeah, so you can get on with it. I think your point is, and actually, behaviours have changed, and it's how you adapt around that. And I think maybe back to your comment, Danielle, astronauts had to adapt. They got to think differently to still survive and live in a different environment, and maybe that sort of creative and thinking and using technology will all sort of go hand in hand and head in that direction. So I think it's a fascinating sort of broad discussion. Let me just sort of try and some of the points that we wanted to sort of try and get to in this discussion was some of the ones that I think we publicised was around how to where do you know where to start? Because it's all very well saying we'll just get on with it. And Daniela, you talked about sort of water and Melanie, you've raised a few comments, but I think one of the questions here, and I think it's probably one of the questions that came up in the chat about skill sets, is as a supply chain expert, how do I know where to start? How do I know where I should focus on to improve sustainability in my supply chains? What's your take on that? What's your guidance you would give to people who are watching this about where to start and how to identify the key areas that they should focus on first? I'm throwing it over to any of you to answer that.
Well, I think what both Daniela and Melanie have highlighted is waste. So if you go to any warehouse, any manufacturing plant, what are they throwing away and why are they throwing it away? That's the easiest and most visible thing. So in the various operations I've run, it may be cardboard that's being thrown out. Okay, needs to be recycled. But how can we stop using so much cardboard in the first place? Is the box that the factory has sent to me one that I can actually repurpose and then send out to a retail store? Absolutely. Why wouldn't I do that? I've just saved buying a new cardboard box, so there's a cost saving, but actually I've not had to use material. So it is certainly looking at that waste thing, which ties absolutely back to Melanie's comment about lean. Well, that's what lean is removal of waste.
Yeah,
I think I would agree. I mean, you start with the evidence, and then, well, first of all, you need to list all the things that you can consider waste in your supply chain. So whether that's materials, or again, overuse of water, overuse of energy, so that could be gas or electricity or whatever, and then you list all the things that you have, and then go for the low-hanging fruit. I mean, what's evident, for example, materials. And then you go your way back until you get to the hardest part. I think it would depend on the country. It would depend on your resources, whether the hardest part would be, for example, to change all of your equipment so you have, let's say, more than engines, so they don't use as much energy. Or the other thing would be, to install something where you create your own energy and then you're being sustainable. So I think that's the way you list all the things that could be considered waste or could be considered your company polluting the planet, and then you go down the list.
Yeah, and I think what you just described there as well was those things that in your role in supply chain you can get on, you can influence, you can focus on, and those which are more broader business decisions with maybe a very different business case, different investments, and needs more of a business-wide approach to take that through. So I think you just described, but they're normally the ones that are in the harder box, the ones which we know we need to get to, but we need all of our colleagues across the business working with us as well. Whereas there's other ones you can just get on with and drive yourself. I mean, I think that's what you described there.
Yeah, and the other thing around that is it is becoming more important as a strategy tool for businesses. If your customers are looking for an environmentally friendly business and you are not an environmentally friendly business, you've lost a customer. So along with supply chain getting a seat at the grown-ups table, sustainability is also achieving that same thing, because it has to be part of a business's strategy in order for them to be successful. You can't go, oh, don't worry about it, because that's the kiss of death for a business.
Yeah, and I mean, Julie, in your role and within the company, Radley, you'll see that. You'll see consumers starting to vote with their feet in terms of the sustainable footprint that they see from the companies that they're dealing with, what they're buying from, especially when you're paying, for a sort of goods that you guys provide.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, there's market research into millennials and Gen Z that there's a lot less brand loyalty there, and a lot more they will move and they're going to go where it's sustainable. They don't care if you've been around for 100 years and everybody can recognize your logo. It just doesn't matter to them. And sustainable strategy. I think it's seen as quite hard, but it is absolutely necessary. And again, we talked about too much yesterday, didn't we? We were having too much fun, but just it's something that has to come from the very top. It has to be, you can hold up Unilever as one of the, a friend of mine described it as like the biggest NGO there is. It's just like it is trying to be as sustainable as possible. And it comes right from the very top and it filters all the way down through every level of the organization. And if you can instill that mentality into your business, then it just starts to become naturally, as opposed to the few people who are like totally pro circularity or how can we improve our materials, whatever it is. If it's across the board, you're going to achieve it. And what I love is that there's more and more evidence that the more sustainable you are, the more profitable you're going to be. So there's a bottom line reason to do this as well as the ethical one.
Yeah, I think we're seeing more. Guy, you're talking about the consumers driving this, but we're seeing more analysts asking the questions, more boards asking the questions, more sort of regulators asking the questions, and all of those will drive business behaviours in the right direction, which is really good to see. That's one of the other points that I wanted to come to was we talked about identifying the areas to focus on. When you look at your suppliers, what sort of questions do you need to be asking of them? What are the specific things that you need your suppliers to be providing you with information on? Daniela, you talked about a few things that you're looking at. When you're talking to your suppliers, what sort of information, what information data are you looking for from them, and how regularly, and what sort of to help you make the right calls and the right decisions?
Well, for example, for food, we have a ton of different norms and regulations that we have to comply. So most of our suppliers, they also need to comply with those regulations. And that's whether that's sustainability or quality or things like that. But I think, again, it depends on to what Melanie said. I mean, it also depends on the policies of the company. I mean, if you are targeting to be a zero emission company, or if you are trying to get a certification on sustainability or things like that, then you also have to look for suppliers that can support that certification, meaning that they need to have their own policies around recycling, the use of recycling materials, but also, for example, in terms of flavor, that's also not another important thing. I mean, they need to also be labor conscious, let's say, to have comply with certain things, not only the country laws, but also, ensure that they have policies around equality and respect and things like that. So I think, again, you need to partner with companies that have a similar mentality or a similar culture. And I think that, in the last few years, we see that most of our suppliers are also switching towards that, because they know that it's a need. It's a need for the planet, so it's a need for business. Because if they do not do that, most of the companies that are in the run to become sustainable or to have these certifications are not going to make business with them.
Yeah, it is really interesting. Dealing with some people in the aerospace and defence sector in the UK, and there's this sort of sense of the major customer, Ministry of Defence in the UK in this case, say to them, where's your net zero plan? And if you don't have one, you can't win any new business. And actually, that's again is that classic of one question, but a very focused question, suddenly gets a whole momentum going down through that sector, which maybe they haven't really been focusing on in the right way. So it's quite an interesting one really good question driving a whole cultural change and a whole almost like corporate change in some of these big contractors that supply to the Ministry of Defence. So I thought that was a great example of the power of the customer, or in this case, a big customer, driving the change in the supply chain. But I mean, Melanie, what you're looking at, the supplier base, what sort of information do you think we should be also looking for?
Well, the key one and the quite easy step to take for companies who are approaching this for the first time is mentioned in the FT article, which is joining under the CDP scheme, the Carbon Disclosure Project scheme, which is where you disclose your carbon, but you also ask all of your suppliers to do the same and all of their suppliers. And just by having that conversation, it starts, you can collaborate more with your partners, with your suppliers, and help put in place targets to bring down their CO2. And I really like that, and it's successful. It's working. I mean, the only issue I have with that is that it's only around carbon and carbon and forestry. I think are the two areas they focus on. But there's not so much the social sustainability there, which I think companies are going to have to put in themselves, and also around water. So you can add those questions in as well.
Right, but you think that's a very good starting point? I think
CDP, because they've done it, their experience, it's what they do, right. And it's recognised the world over.
Yeah. And Guy, from your perspective, anything you want to add on
that? I think the sort of the data capture, the concept of CDP or to make sure that your suppliers understand that their trading relationship with you is at risk if they don't supply. We want to be able to stand up as a brand and saying we are on the journey, we are trying to make more sustainable products, or our packaging is recycled, or it's FSC or whatever. Therefore, you have to join us on that journey, because if you don't join us on that journey, you won't be one of our suppliers. And again, much smaller scale than the MOD, absolutely. But we are trying to drive that sort of attitude from our supplier base, and there is a huge level of collaboration with them to join us on that journey.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we're all saying asking the right questions, getting the information, getting to share is a key part of driving a change. I want to come back to one of the other questions that Ashley Cook had raised. And it's probably slightly different slant here, which was talking about that actually says the World Economic Forum has listed analytical thinking and innovation, complex problem solving, creativity, originality, initiative and leadership, and social influence are the skills we require. This is a long question, by the way. Let me just carry on. So what is the one thing that we as supply chain leaders need to take away from today's session so we can have as an objective to enable net zero inclusivity through any lens? I think that's a long way of saying, so what's the one thing that as a supply chain leader you need to sort of include into all those broad skills of the skill that a supply chain leader needs to have to drive this forward?
Question everything.
Okay.
Simple. Because all of those start with a question. Why are we doing that? How are we doing that? How can we do it better? It's again, we're back to the lean principles of 5 whys or whatever that drive that search for the answers.
I would put it more like a continuous improvement mindset. Yeah. So you need to be better. And I mean, to your point, you need to do things differently, but with a goal in mind. And whether that goal is zero emissions, zero waste, etc. But I would say the continuous improvement culture and mindset.
And that's also a skill set as well, though, isn't it, Daniela? That whole sort of approach to what do you mean by continuous improvement? The approaches you take, the methodology, the tools and techniques you can use, because the mindset's there, but you also need the skill set to drive that through as well, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Melanie, your view?
Well, I'm going to go with my two colleagues on the panel, actually. I really like what they said, and I'm going to take it one step further with Guy, which is to say, actually ask the question, what is the purpose of our supply chain? And it's a question I don't think is asked very often, and it's taking it back from that supply chain level back up to the corporate strategy, sort of the competitive strategy, say, what are we trying to achieve here? What is our core purpose? What services do we want to offer to our customers and how? And then from taking it back, stepping back and actually defining that, then you can go back and go, oh, right, then we probably, maybe we haven't got things right here. I mean, I know it's quite a simple thing to say, but I don't think that question's asked enough. It's just because I heard this lovely thing. Someone said it's like supply chains grow out of disaster. And I think it's a little harsh, but it's, they grow organically. And I think if you take a step back and say, this was right for what we needed then, but can we take a step back? Things have moved on. What do we really want to achieve with our supply chain? And that works for sustainability. It works for resilience. It works for everything.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of what I've seen from anyone looking at supply chains over the last 18 months, that they've really had to question those supply chains. They didn't know how exposed they were to resilient issues. They didn't know how exposed they were to other issues. The modern slavery questions came through. People just haven't understood their supply chain. And then they are coming back and going, well, how would that supply chain be different? How would I design it in a different way to still achieve my business goals, but to have a lot of these other aspects in place? But that is again, it's a skill set, but it's quite a strategic mindset change.
Yeah.
So some organizations are facing. I also know others I speak to who are still putting a bit in the head in the sand going, oh, to be fine, we'll go back to how we were. I don't think we will. I don't think, from everything I've seen so far, and certainly with COP26 going on this week, in the statements coming out, I don't think any of us will say we were able to go back to how supply chains were, and we need to fundamentally drive those changes through.
Totally agree.
Yeah. So we're almost out of time. I can't believe that time flew by. And as you said, Melanie, we had such a good time talking about this yesterday as well. We could have filled 2 hours with this. But I think if you the one question here that probably is the last one that I just ask each of you to just have a quick comment on it: is net zero possible? Now, is it possible for your organisation or an organisation to get to a net zero carbon emissions? And I'll ask you all to sort of give your view.
Much to my shame, I'll have to repeat my answer from yesterday. We will do everything we can to get as close as humanly possible, and then we will have to resort to carbon credits of some description. Because whatever I do, the manufacturing, particularly, for example, of our leather products, come from factories that specialize in that. I cannot bring those factories to the UK because we don't have the resources here. So I will be moving things on ships and hopefully not planes, on ships. So we will do everything within our power to get there, but there will be an element at the bottom where I don't genuinely believe I can get to that zero level. And we will have to do something as an offset. And whether that's, we're already planting forests in Borneo as we speak, whether it's those sorts of things or whether it's carbon credits, but carbon credits do make you nervous.
Okay, thanks, Guy. Daniela, do you think it's achievable? Do you think it is possible to get to net zero?
I think that the question is when. I think it will be possible eventually. I think we're going towards the right direction. And probably with the technology that we currently know and with the methodologies that we currently know, it is hard. So we're gonna get closer. But I think the research and the new technologies that we're gonna find along the way, and also the need, because again, if we all of a sudden run out of something, I believe that the human race is gonna get creative enough to solve for that. So I think eventually we'll get there. I don't know how long it will take for every single industry to do that.
So it's achievable, but it's on big time. Yeah.
Yes.
Melanie?
Yeah, I think it's achievable. I go with what Guy says, is that there'll always be an element of offset, which I'm also not so keen on, but better that than nothing. But I don't think the question, I think we need to broaden the question, which is more to be how we're going to be sustainable. And I'm going to kind of steal a bit from Daniela here, if I may. it's continuous improvement, because the technology is moving so fast at the moment. Stealing from Danielle again, necessity is the mother of invention. It's like things are changing fast enough so that we will evolve. We will continually be getting, hopefully, better social sustainability, better economic sustainability and environmental sustainability. And it will just be an ongoing process, and net zero is one aspect of it. But we can do it. We have to.
Absolutely.
My kids watching rubbish television.
Absolutely, and that's probably a really good sort of point to end on that, Melanie. We can do it. It will take a lot of time, a lot of focus, a lot of drive from everyone associated with it, and maybe a lot of passion that actually we can make a difference, and we can actually sort of drive this forward in the right way. Really good point to end on. And I just, Daniela, Guy, Melanie, thank you very much for your time today. It's been great discussion. As you said, we had a preparation yesterday. We probably could have carried on for another hour today, because there's probably such a breadth here of the topic, and maybe it's one that we need to come back to on a future episode of Supply Chain Talk to allow us to explore this in more detail. And maybe as more stuff comes out of COP26, we may have other pledges and other commitments that we all need to be making. So thank you all for your time today. It's been really appreciated. I'd also like to thank the people who have been on the chat, adding comments and thoughts, and also Ashley Cook, particularly for his questions. And I think, Ashley, this lovely mug, we will make sure you get one on its way. The supply chain isn't quite as smooth as it could be, but it will get its way there in the end. But thank you for that, Ashley, and for your questions. They've been really good. Next week's Supply Chain Talk is going to be on delivering supply chain traceability through the blockchain. So the use of technology and how that traceability elements will come through. And I'm sure we'll get back to traceability and sustainability and issues as we go through that as well. So if you can join us next week, that'll be great as well. But as I said, Daniela, Melanie, Guy, thank you for your time today. It's been a really good session.
Thank you, Duncan.
Thank you.